Hey guys, so I have returned from my month off from BookTube. It wasn't entirely a month off because I did post like a couple of videos, but they were sporadic. But now I am back for regular BookTube video making, and I'm really excited to be back because I really enjoy being here. And I considered starting off my year with my best books of 2020, but I am a little drained. I drove back to my apartment from my parents' house over the course of 2 days. I got back yesterday, and this morning I spent unpacking everything and organizing my apartment with all my some of the new things I've acquired, and so I'm very drained and don't feel like I have the energy for a Best Books of 2020 video. But I will do something like that. I will either do a 2020 retrospective and 2021 plans, which includes the top books, or I'll just do top books videos plus a 2021 plans video. So look out for that, but I thought that I would start off things easy with just a haul of the books that I acquired over the holiday season. I last year was participating in the Year of Reading One's Own, which is sort of a challenge hosted by Jason and Kelly from Old Blues Chapter and Verse and Books I'm Not Reading, respectively, where they challenge people not to buy any books. And I was like, I'm gonna be generous with myself and say that I was mostly successful. I did have some cheats, I did buy some books, but I still acquired many fewer books than I'd acquired in many years, so I feel like it was still a success in that sense, because you don't need to be 100% successful to be successful. You know, I think I was maybe like 80% successful in that whole project, and that's pretty decent. That's like a B-. But now I am out of that year, and now I'm allowed to buy books again. My game plan is to allow myself to buy half of the number of books that I read each month from now on, and I feel like that'll be a good way of allowing myself to indulge myself a little bit, but also managing my book buying a little bit. And I've already sort of gotten some negative credit because I went to a thrift store, and I went to a thrift store and got some books, and I'll get to those books. But I also just said that as a freebie, I would let myself buy 10 books. Because I had gift cards and I received money, so I felt wealthy. So I also just acquired 10 books. So anyway, I have a big haul. So there are books that I received for Christmas that I asked for. There are books that I bought with either gift cards or with money. And there's books from a thrift haul that I went to a thrift store yesterday. There's one book that I was sent by a friend, and then there are books that I just took from my parents' house because I'm curious, because they were just there. They're either old books of mine that I read and want to reread, books that my parents gave me, not as Christmas presents, but just because they had read them and told me that I should take them. And one book actually was given to me by my aunt. Anyway, I will start off with the book that I was sent from a friend, and that book is Zona on Andrei Tarkovsky's Stalker by Jeff Dyer. Jeff Dyer is a very well-known English essayist and novelist, and I have actually listened to some interviews with him, and I think also a lecture that he gave, and he seems like a very approachable, interesting writer. But this is the book that he wrote about Stalker, one of Andrei Tarkovsky's greatest films, and that's a film that I love. I love Andrei Tarkovsky. He's one of my favorite directors, and this is just a book discussing that film. And Jason from Old Blues Chapter and Verse sent this to me, and he and I are actually going to be buddy reading this book and also both watching Stalker. And then actually we're also gonna, on top of that, do a discussion video together over Zoom. And yeah, that should be really exciting. He sent this to me at the beginning of December, or maybe even at the end of November. So I've had this for some time, but I thought that I would haul it first since I received it the first. I will move on to the books that I received as Christmas gifts. These were all books that I specifically asked for. This is Power in Conservation, Environmental Anthropology Beyond Political Ecology by Carol Carpenter. Now that title may not sound like all that much, or may sound very full of jargon and weird, but Carol Carpenter is my mom's sister. She's my aunt. She's an instructor at Yale University. She's an environmental anthropologist. She's a really interesting person and kind of an intellectual hero of mine, to be quite honest. And this is a book that she just recently published, and so she just gave me and my brother copies just because, and I think it might be interesting. It's about sort of power and how power, specifically cultural power, plays a role in environmentalism and fighting climate change, and and preservation and that sort of thing. And yeah, so it sounds really interesting and pretty, I mean, important stuff, I think, too. But moving on to books that I asked for, the first one here is Grief Lessons, 4 Plays by Euripides, translated by Anne Carson. This is a New York Review of Books classic, and I love Euripides. He is one of my favorite writers, one of my favorite playwrights, and Anne Carson is a Canadian poet who I think is very interesting. I've listened to some lectures and interviews with her, and I think she's a fascinating person. I've read a very little bit of her writing, and I think she is a really interesting writer. I can't say that I love her as a writer, but I do find her very interesting. But when I heard that she did these translations of Euripides, I was super intrigued. And this is my first acquisition of a New York Review of Books classic. I had not up to this point owned any of these editions, which I think are just beautiful. So that's really exciting. So yeah, I will be rereading some Euripides in new translations. And the plays in here are, just so you know, they are Heracles, Hecate, Hippolytus, and Alcestis. So there's that. And then sticking with the classical theme, this is the Aeneid of Virgil, and I am not a huge fan of Virgil's Aeneid. It's rather dull in many stretches. Basically, when Dido is on the page, it's awesome, and when she's not, it's sort of hit or miss. But I am interested to read this particular translation because, as far as I know, it is the only translation of Virgil's Aeneid that's ever been done by a woman. Sarah Rudin is well known, I think, as a translator. She's done a really acclaimed translation of the Confessions of St. Augustine, which I haven't read, but I may at some point. So yeah, I was intrigued to reread Virgil's Aeneid in this particular translation. All right, the next few after this are also going to be classically themed. So this is the Histories of Herodotus in the lovely edition. This is the translation by Tom Holland, and it has an introduction by Paul Cartledge, and I read the histories last year in a translation by Robin Waterfield. It was in the Oxford World's Classics edition, but I've heard really good things about Tom Holland's translation, and I listened to a lecture by Tom Holland about Herodotus that really got me interested in reading not only Tom Holland's own books, but his translation of Herodotus, and I know I will reread Herodotus at some point, so why not do it in a new translation? This next one is a large volume of poetry. This is Ovid, Poems of Exile, and this is translated by Peter Green, so this includes the Tristia and the Black Sea Letters, and these are poems that Ovid wrote after he was exiled from Rome. He was exiled from Rome after writing his masterpiece, The Metamorphoses, for reasons that are a bit unclear. I think the only real clue that we have as to why he was banished was because he saw something he shouldn't and heard something he shouldn't, so that's very ambiguous, but anyway. So he was basically living in this strange land. He was exiled to a place which we would now call the Crimea, that little peninsula in the Black Sea. And these are poems that he wrote while he was in exile. So very kind of, as I understand it, sort of melancholic in a way. But yeah, I want to read as much as I can by Ovid, because I think he's one of my favorite writers of the ancient world. And then this is another book by an ancient Roman, but it's one that I've already read as well. This is The War with Hannibal by Livy, and I already read this book, and I read it in this translation, in this exact same edition, but my other edition was very old. I bought it used. It was, yeah, just not great looking. I had reinforced it with tape and everything, but this is a new just copy of the Penguin Classic, and this has the Aubrey de Selangor translation and the introduction by Betty Radis. So this is a book. This when I do my top books of 2020, this book will appear, and so I wanted a really nice copy of it. And then we end out with a really big collection of poetry. This is the collected poems of James Merrill, who is fast becoming one of my favorite poets. I won't decide right now whether or not he is like my absolute favorite poet, but he is certainly one of my favorite poets, one of the greatest American poets of the 20th century, for sure. At some point, I will need to get around to tackling The Changing Light at Sandover, his great epic poem that he wrote about ghosts, basically, as I've heard. And but this is a collection of his shorter poems, and yeah, it'll make a good addition to my collection. The only volume of Merrill's poetry that I currently have is this tiny little Everyman Library edition, which has a really good selection, but you know, we need more, because he's a favorite. Now I will move on to books that I bought, either with gift cards or just with my own money, because I felt wealthy at some point. And unfortunately, several books have yet to actually arrive. I ordered a lot of books from Books A Million because I wanted to order from someplace that wasn't Amazon, and a lot of those books have yet to arrive, even though I ordered them like 3 weeks ago. So either the Trump administration did an extremely effective job of screwing with the USPS, or Books A Million is just having trouble. But anyway, so some of these books I will have to sort of just, if I can figure out with my editing software how to like put a photo up of the cover, I will, because I think that helps. But if I can't, then you'll just have to hear me talk about it. But I'll start with the books that I have physically. The first one is Jack by Marilyn Robinson, the 4th book in her Gilead series, I guess we have to call it now. We can't call it the Gilead trilogy because there were more than 3 books, but this is the 4th in her Gilead series, and I knew as soon as I heard that this was being released that I was going to buy it at some point, and I'm so excited to read it. It's all about Jack Boughton, the sort of young, lost soul of Gilead, Iowa. Really looking forward to that. I really need to reread the other books too, but I think what I might do is read this one, then reread all the others, and then by that point, by the time I'm done rereading all the others, I'll be ready to reread Jack as well. And then this next one is a Discourse on Colonialism by Aimé Césaire, which is sort of a short book, but it's an extended essay about colonialism, basically. And I heard Brianna from Brianna's Library talk about this book and read an excerpt, which I thought was just brilliant, and so I had to have it. So really excited to read that one, a really short book, shouldn't take long. And then another slim book, which also comes recommended by Brianna. This is Our Prisons Obsolete by Angela Davis, which has a pretty self-explanatory title. And this sounds interesting not only because of what it has to say about the prison system, but it also seems to be about sort of just the idea of abolitionism. Not just the abolition of slavery, but the abolition of prisons, the abolition of Jim Crow, and about how when, for example, when slavery was still an institution in the U.S., a lot of people just didn't see abolition as practical, and when Jim Crow laws were around, people just didn't see abolishing them as practical. They just thought, oh, well, it's never going to happen. How can you expect us to fight for that when it's never going to happen? And yet, it did happen. And so part of what this is about, as I understand it, is that, we might think that abolishing prisons is, like, impractical and so on and so forth, but she's going to make the argument that to have that attitude is to have the same attitude as sort of slave owner, pro-slavery people and so on. So, anyway, it just sounds very interesting. And then here is The Light of Truth, Writings of an Anti-Lynching Crusader by Ida B. Wells. I got really interested in reading Ida B. Wells when I read Women, Race, and Class by Angela Davis, which is also going to be in my Best Books of 2020 video. She wrote a fair amount about Ida B. Wells in that book, I believe, and I've just heard about Ida B. Wells in various other books that I've read about 19th century American history, and so I really want to read some of her work. She wrote a lot about lynching. She was, that was a big issue that she wrote about a lot, and it had a very sort of personal significance for her because a close friend of hers was lynched. And anyway, it's a big book, but I'm really excited. I've heard she's a great writer. And then the last book that sort of keeps with the theme of these 3 books that I've talked about already, of sort of social justice and so on, is one that I don't have with me, but it's In Search of Our Mother's Gardens, Womanist Prose by Alice Walker. And that's a book, a collection of essays I wanted to read for donkey's years, basically. It's basically about just the civil rights movement, the women's movement, racism, sexism. There's some literary criticism in it. She writes about, like, Zora Neale Hurston and other writers. But I've wanted to read it for donkey's years ever since I read The Color Purple. I absolutely love The Color Purple. I've never said that, I don't think, on my channel, but I do love that novel. And I've been wanting to read this work of nonfiction by Alice Walker ever since I read it. And then, a book that I bought as well was These Truths, A History of the United States by Jill Lepore, which has quite a reputation on BookTube now because Karen Evans is hosting the These Truths read-along, which I don't think I'm going to join in, but I definitely want to read this book because I really want to read just a survey of American history, and I've heard that this one is really good and really accessible. The next 3 books are also kind of on a theme. I have a small project that I'm going to do this year. where I read books on topics that I'm skeptical about, highly skeptical of, and I have 3 topics picked out. The 3 topics are God, ghosts, and psychics. So I don't believe in God, I don't believe in ghosts, and I believe that psychics are basically frauds. And I want to read books on those subjects, just to keep an open mind, you know what I mean? And so I bought 3 books, one on each subject. So the first of those is Ghost Hunters, William James and the Search for Scientific Proof of Life After Death by Deborah Blum, which is all about this sort of group of people, including William James, who tried to search for, real proof of life after death, of the existence of ghosts. And from what I've heard, basically, like 99% of their experiments showed nothing, but like 1% did actually suggest that there is life after death. And I've also just heard that it's a great book, just really well written. Jason from Old Books Chapter and Verse recommended it, so that's the first one. The other 2 are 2 more that I don't have physically. So the first one is called The Evidence for God by Keith Ward. Self-explanatory title. That was recommended by Neil Griffiths, but basically Keith Ward argues that God exists, basically. And then the last one is The Light Between Us by Laura Lynn Jackson, which is a book about a psychic and about her experience as a psychic. And that book was recommended by Karen Evans, who did a really great review of it. So those are the 3 books that I'm reading on topics that I'm highly skeptical of, and I'm pretty pumped for that project. But the last 2 books that I ordered that I haven't received yet, the first one is My Bright Abyss by Christian Wyman, which is sort of a meditation about belief and death and mortality by a poet. Christian Wyman is a great American poet. I haven't really read any of his poetry, but I've been wanting to read this book for some time. And then the last book that I don't have is called Talking Pictures, and I think the subtitle is like How to Watch Movies or something like that, and it's by Anne Hornaday, and it's just all about sort of watching movies, what to look for in movies, what makes a good movie, and so on and so forth. And now I have the books that I just grabbed from my parents' house, or that my parents gave to me. The first one is one where the cover won't actually tell you all that much, but this is an outline history of Greece. The authors are John Vincent and James Joy. So yeah, I really feel like I should read more about Greek and Roman history, since I read so many Greek and Roman classics. So this is really a slim introductory volume. The next one is Immortal Poems of the English Language, edited by Oscar Williams, and the self-explanatory title, it has it has a pretty basic selection by poets like John Milton and Shakespeare and John Dryden and T.S. Eliot and so on. But yeah, anyway, this is a really nice collection. The only thing I don't like about it is that Oscar Williams includes some of his own poems, which I feel like is just incredibly egotistical. But I was reading from it while I was home and realizing that it is, other than that, a really great anthology. And then these next 2 are books that I read as kids. So the first one is the Warriors series. So I grabbed the first 2 books in the series that I read as a kid, and this is about basically a series of books about cats who live in the wild, basically. And I just loved this series as a kid. I gobbled up so many of these books, and I'm curious to try to reread some of them, so I grabbed the first 2. And then the other series that I read as a kid was Guardians of Ga'Hoole. And this is actually books 2 through 6. I need to find a copy of book 1. Maybe I'll just get it from the library. But again, I would like to try and see if these hold up as an adult. I gobbled these up as a kid, and I would just like to see what I think of them now as an adult. And then I also grabbed a copy of the Bible. This is the Revised Standard Version. I think this is like my 3rd or 4th copy of the Bible, so that's just how great an atheist I am. But yeah, I grabbed it because it's the Revised Standard Version, because I'm just curious at looking at different translations. So yeah, I grabbed that one. And then the next 2 are ones that my dad gave me. So the first one, he didn't give them to me as Christmas gifts, just he read them and thought I might like them. The first is called Always an Immigrant, a Cultural Memoir by Mohammed Yadagari with Priscilla Yadagari. So I'll read you the blurb because I don't know much about it, but so the blurb is, this collection of personal stories engages, entertains, and educates about cultural norms and mores of the 1940s, 1950s, and the beginning of the 1960s in the Middle East, when Mohammed Yadagari was growing up there. Serious yet often humorous, the stories describe the truths behind such topics as temporary marriage, veiling and seclusion of women, ceremonial politeness, racism, and bigotry. A great storyteller, Dr. Yadagari regales his readers with tales of his life experiences that prepared him for his immigrant life in the United States. At the same time, he debunks some of the misconceptions that are common in both the Middle East and the United States. So that sounds really interesting, really sort of up my alley, but I haven't heard anything about this book aside from my dad. Like, on Goodreads it has 1 review, so that's really interesting. But anyway, yeah, so there's that. And then the other book that my dad gave me is The Nature Fix, Why Nature Makes Us Happier, Healthier, and More Creative by Florence Williams. This is sort of a self-help book, which I'm not that into, but my dad gave it to me. This seems like the kind of book that Karen Evans would read. If you've read this, Karen, let me know. But anyway, yeah, so I suppose I'll try to get around to reading it at some point. And then I also grabbed my old copy of What I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings by Maya Angelou. So it's a really lovely edition. I really love this book. I read it several years ago now, and I should reread it, I think. So I grabbed it. And then finally, a book I took was a book that my aunt left at my parents' house. She originally gave it to my brother, but also recommended it to me, but my brother didn't take it with him, so I decided to take it. And this is The Books of Earthsea, the complete illustrated edition by Ursula K. Le Guin, with illustrations by Charles Vess. And so, yeah, it's lovely edition, obviously illustrated. But yeah, I read the first book in this series actually a couple of years ago now, and wasn't exactly the biggest fan, but I have read the premise of the second book, and it sounds much more like something that I would like. So I'm going to give it a try and see what I think of the second book, and if I like it, I will continue with the series. If I don't, then I will just, I don't know, put this back in my parents' house, or give it to my aunt, back to my aunt, or something. But, I mean, when you have a free book you can grab, then why not? Alright, now we are in the last stage. This is my thrift store haul. When I got home yesterday, I arrived home at about 2 in the afternoon, and after I lugged everything into all my stuff into my apartment, I decided to go grocery shopping and to go to the thrift store to see if there were any books. And there were some. I got a small but really nice pile. The first one is a bit of a weird one. This is Brain Workout, Math and Logic Puzzles by Dave Tuller and Michael Rios. I've just heard that stuff like this is good for your brain, but stuff like this tends to make me feel stupid and frustrate me, so we will see how much of this I get through, but still, I thought it might be fun. It's not really something I'll, like, read through or review on my channel, but I grabbed it anyway. And then, this is The Story of Philosophy, The Lives and Opinions of the Greater Philosophers by Will Durant. Yeah, so, self-explanatory title, but I am interested in philosophy, so I grabbed it. And then we have a couple Civil War books, and these were really exciting finds. So this first one, the cover is not going to tell you much, but this is This Hallowed Ground by Bruce Catton, which was sort of on a deal cart at the thrift store. So there's like the map in it, and if you want to see the title page, here you go. This is his great history of the Civil War, his great 1-volume history of the Civil War, and I'm going to be buddy reading this in June with Sharon Goforth, so yeah, that was a great find. The next one is also a Civil War themed find. This is Crossroads of Freedom, Antietam, The Battle That Changed the Course of the Civil War by James McPherson, and this is just his narrative of the Battle of Antietam, which was a turning point in the Civil War. And I already own James McPherson's Battle Cry of Freedom, his really big 1-volume history of the Civil War, which I'm sure I will read at some point, but yeah, I thought that this would be good. After I read the Bruce Catton, maybe I'll read this, and then some point I'll graduate to the James McPherson 1-volume, big 1-volume, and then maybe I'll graduate at some point to the 3-volume Shelby Foote history. But yeah, anyway. And I've heard good things about this book, too. I think Bill Ruttenberg called it once, I want to say. But maybe it was Steve Donahue. One of those booktubers who's into history and whatnot. But anyway, so yeah, Antietam. And then finally, a really lovely book. This is 500 Nations by Alvin M. Josephy Jr. And the subtitle is An Illustrated History of North American Indians. So, there's no dust jacket, unfortunately, but it is a lovely, lovely volume, lavishly illustrated. So yeah, anyway, I was excited to find this because I have an interest in the subject matter, and I've heard good things about Alvin and Josephine, so there's that, and that is the haul. Okay, that was a huge haul. So anyway, as always, give me your thoughts if you have any on these books, if you've read them or want to read them or anything like that. If any of you see a book here that you want to buddy read with me, let me know, because I feel like I should be more like outgoing and social on BookTube. So if any of you want to buddy read any of these, let me know, because that would be a lot of fun. But anyway, other than that, I will let you all go. Here's to a better reading year of 2021. Here's to a better year in general. It's not off to a great start, but we will hope for the best. Anyway, I will let you all go. Bye.